Hi, my name is Shermara Fletcher, and I'm the Principal Officer for Pentecostal, Charismatic, and Multicultural Relations at Churches Together in England. And it's an absolute privilege to be here with you at the 2021 Proximity Conference. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you 3 key tips for how you can sustain and cultivate a healthy rhythm for ministry and mission in your urban context. The 3 key tips that I'm going to focus on, and as you are watching this, do feel free to grab a notepad and pen, are these. Tip number 1, a sustained me equals a sustained ministry, the power of devotion and rest. Tip number 2, a missional focus on the development of unlikely leaders radically transforms our church and our world. And tip number 3, don't do this alone. The value of ecumenism. We're in this to work together and collaborate, not to compete. But before I delve into these 3 key tips, I'm going to share a little bit of my story of getting into the mission field. And it all began for me at the age of 18. I remember I was in my local church and I used to be very engaged with praise and worship and from a Pentecostal background. And I remember looking out the window one Sunday and I said, this is amazing what we're doing in here, but I think you're calling me to something out there, God. And that revelation radically changed my life forever. We set up a student group called Transform, where we used to go out onto the streets of Birmingham, speak with homeless people, speak with the community. And on day 1 of that mission, day 1 of that calling, I was quickly humbled. You might be thinking, why, Shermara? What happened? Well, I went out with my local evangelist, went out onto the streets, and I said, I'm going to bring Jesus to these streets. We're going to radically transform the world for Jesus. And I was very quickly humbled because Jesus was already there. There were amazing homeless ministers, homeless pastors, pastoring their community and doing mission amongst themselves. And I very quickly realized that I'm here to participate in what God is already doing. I then went to study in Chicago, Illinois. And whilst I was out there, I saw such a huge, stark divide between those who had and those who had not. And to be honest with you, it made me angry. These are first world countries. Why are people living in such deprivation and poverty? And when I came back to the UK with my group, I said, do you know what? We need to go to Parliament. We need to talk to some of these policymakers. What they are, creating isn't always translating on the ground. And God has a great sense of humor. He heard me. And a year later, I ended up on the Buxton Leadership Programme at the Centre of Theology and Community, working half the week with Parliament and the other half of the week on homelessness work, which I will speak about a bit later in this talk. So I am now going to go on to tip number 1. A sustained me equals a sustained ministry, the power of devotion and rest, passion, calling, vocation, zeal, a determination to see our communities, the nation, and the world radically transformed for Jesus. Our communities, our projects alive and on fire for God are all key buzzwords that we hear in our missional pursuits. However, today I want to challenge us, particularly during this global pandemic, that to sustain a ministry in a context of rapid change, deep lament and sorrow, fast-moving technology, innovation, and artificial intelligence, political polarity, and communities fragmented by divisive populism, that you firstly need to focus on sustaining you. Now, you may say, Shermara, that's a bit selfish. That goes against our Christian values. To be selfless is the mark of Christian humility and self selflessness is what we aim for, and we don't promote selfishness as a character trait as Christians. And yes, I would agree with you to a certain extent on that. But I really want to highlight that sustaining oneself is the only way you'll be able to sustain others. Now, this might seem glaringly obvious, but I've come to remind you, just as Jesus did when he identified to love your neighbor as you love yourself, because often as Christian leaders, often as missionaries with a zeal and passion to see your communities transformed, and especially when you are heavily focused on sustaining others, it can be very easy to forget about yourself. Now, what does this practically look like? It looks like rest, contemplation, meditation, setting boundaries with yourself, your ministry, and dare I even say it, even your congregants, your communities, and your family. Pope Francis, I really respect Pope Francis. He reminds us that rest is necessary for the health and our minds and our bodies, and often so difficult to achieve due to the many demands placed on us. But rest is also essential for our spiritual health so that we can hear God's voice and understand what he asks of us. So here, Pope Francis is really reminding us that we need to hear God's voice, which suggests there are many alternative voices that we can hear in our society and our church, as well as our missional communities that compete for our attention. Now, Francis shows us that rest leads to revelation. I'm going to say that again. Francis shows us that rest leads to revelation, which ensures that our missionary pursuits and our purpose and outputs are based on the people that God has sent us to, not before the programs we want to implement. It's people before the program, and rest allows us to hear what God is saying. Jesus also reminds us about the importance of setting boundaries, boundaried time for rest, for spiritual devotion and renewal. And we see this in Jesus's own ministry, which emerged out of a season of rest and retreat into the wilderness. But today, to help us really explore what I mean when I say sustained me equals a sustained ministry, I want to draw our attention to the story of Jesus sleeping and resting in the middle of a storm with his disciples on their way to complete their mission in the Gerasenes. I find this story really interesting because the text tells us in Mark 4:38 that Jesus was in a storm, sleeping on a cushion, which suggests to me he wasn't just sleeping, Jesus was sleeping comfortably. The disciples were understandably frantic, frustrated, confused, perplexed. Why on earth would Jesus be sleeping in one of the most challenging and life-threatening experiences on their journey and on a journey to mission? And I want you to follow me here because this really speaks to our current context as we navigate and live through one of the most perplexing, challenging, frustrating, and confusing and life-threatening times in our era. Now, a bit further in this story, after Jesus calms the storm, the disciples ask amongst themselves, "Who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." Now, when we rest, we are able to see more of who God truly is, and then more clearly who God wants us to be whilst carrying out his mission, helping us to cultivate and sustain the mission that we've been called to do. So rest is that incubator for hearing, for seeing, for reflecting, and ensuring that we carry out God's mission and not our own. Now, Thomas Merton, he also offers a wise insight in his encouragement that vocation doesn't come from a voice out there calling us to be something we are not. It comes from a voice in here calling us to be the person we were born to be, to fulfill the original selfhood given at birth by God. And we discover this in a posture of rest, which enables us to listen. And hear me, rest doesn't mean inaction. Rest means a postured heart understanding that we are stewards in the mission and not owners of it. So that helps us to rest knowing whose mission this is, because once we are rested, we can then sustain the ministry going forward. So let Jesus' calming of the storm invite us to be countercultural and find rest, whilst the storm gives us revelation and strategies on how to do mission in seasons of chaos. You see, that even the storm has a purpose. Even the storm has a purpose. It teaches us how to do mission in a season of chaos. And this story challenges us, particularly those of us who are high capacity, have so much zeal, energy, not to base our confidence in our busyness, energy, or even passion for our communities and our missional assignments, but in God's sustenance. So remember, a sustained me equals a sustained ministry, which leads me to tip number 2. A missional focus on the development of unlikely leaders in our communities and on our mission field radically transforms our church and the world. Now, in setting God's People Free report, we are advised that until the laity and clergy, / church leaders, are convinced, based on their baptismal mutuality, that they are equal in worth and status, complementary in gifting and vocation, mutually accountable in discipleship, and equal partners in mission, we will never form Christian communities that can evangelize this nation. Not only do they transform how we do mission, it sustains the mission by expanding the gifts involved and cultivate a healthy rhythm and expectation that the mission is not the responsibility of a few. Now, in my time of grassroots engagement, some of the most life-giving moments in my own personal journey, I was amazed at the impact that was produced in our mission when we intentionally developed those who would be usually overlooked. I called these dynamic gifts to the church our mission, in our mission, the unlikely leader. Now, out of my typologies of unlikely leaders, today I'm going to focus on the often powerless, unlikely leader, which when doing mission, particularly to vulnerable communities, you will definitely encounter. Now, unlikely leaders who often experience powerlessness through multiple ways in their daily lives are not only a gift to the church and to our mission, but they can be spiritual and cultural transformers of our institutions. This includes individuals who have overcome trauma and addiction, former homeless individuals, those who experience poor working conditions and wages and often have less agency in their everyday lives. Oftentimes, these unlikely leaders are seen as those who the church helps. And this is appropriate at times because they are often facing vulnerability, but is not the sole purpose of our interaction or of our mission. Intentionally building relationships with this type of unlikely leader is transformational, as many powerless unlikely leaders are used to interactions where they are solely the beneficiary, are felt sorry for, and their identity is often linked to their vulnerability, and our missions and our churches can perpetuate this myth. Now, I just want to give us a short exegesis to really look at the value of developing unlikely leaders for our mission field in a post-COVID world. Luke chapter 5, verse 11 highlights the importance of developing unlikely leaders in and for our mission in the account of Jesus choosing his first disciple, Peter. Now, for me, it's very interesting that Jesus' first choice for his top team, core team, cabinet, however you have your governance structures, that Jesus chooses a fisherman. Now, growing up in the temple, he would have been surrounded by rabbis and leaders of the temple. He could have sought to align with the political leaders of the day. He could have chosen to compound his power and influence with the socialites of the day to expand his influence. Yet, he chooses Peter, a simple fisherman, and I can't imagine that he would have looked or smelt the part. This text, this encounter, Jesus' first choice, highlights key themes, especially for those who are leading in the development of missionaries, and especially for those who want to reach out to those who wouldn't necessarily consider themselves missionary leaders. What does this highlight to us? Point number one, unlikely leaders often do not esteem themselves or are quick to disqualify themselves due to their perceived lack of stature. When Peter is approached by Jesus, he very quickly points out his flaws. He says, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees. Go away from me, Lord, he said. I'm a sinful man. Yet Jesus sees great potential and publicly affirms Peter. Not only that, Peter then goes on to build and establish the church, and we are the missional fruit of Peter's vision. So, what unlikely leaders might you be overlooking in your context? Which leads me to point number two. Our missional leadership is qualified in identifying other leaders. When finding an unlikely leader, dare yourself to see beyond their current position. Dare yourself to look beyond their role, their class, their background, their perspective, and help them to see that they are needed for God's mission. Now, how do you develop the unlikely leader? You might say, okay, Shermara, this is great, but how do we do this? How do we reach out to people that God might have a charism, a gift that he wants to unleash in the church? How do we do this? Well, I'm going to give you a few tips for this. When developing the unlikely leader, it pushes us to be radically inclusive, to genuinely look at what it takes for their development, even if it means repositioning our programs and our structures. When you are developing an unlikely leader, please remember it is as much about the process. It is as much about the process than the end result. The value of the often powerless, unlikely leader is evident when institutional systems are in place to take seriously their development, their growth, and their vocation. They may also operate in a different way of knowing. And what I mean by this is they might not be cerebral, they may have creativity. So, how does our craftsmanship of knowledge production and the value of that production, how is this expanded? How is it made accessible for different ways of knowing and understanding God's mission and God's world? Because this will help to influence our culture to reach the many people that society is waiting on us to reach. Now, when I was developing the homeless ministry in East London, our leadership team consisted of former homeless individuals, those who were vulnerable, as well as housed individuals. And this helped us to really develop this theory of the unlikely leaders who experience powerlessness in their everyday life. And what we found is that this development in those who didn't necessarily fit what we would have considered a leader helped the church to grow. It helped the church to reach new disciples, to build new missionary places of worship, to transform the church and help them to see more of the diverse kingdom of God. And this involved patience. You need to have patience when developing your community of unlikely leaders to be missionaries on God's field. You also have to be okay with things being a bit messy or not the status quo. Allow your structures to have room for their mistakes as they develop into their vocation. We need to be open and humble to the way that God manifests differently to different people in our world. Also, you have to make sure that your leadership is involved, that your leadership from trustee boards, PCCs, whatever your governance structures are, that they make space for the learning for new unlikely leaders. Also resist the assumption that the Holy Spirit is not already working and speaking in more fragile and displaced vulnerable communities. And finally, do not be hard on yourself. Give yourself that room to figure it out. You don't have to solve everything tomorrow. So give yourself that space. So tip number 2, remember, developing unlikely leaders transforms our church and our world, which leads me to tip number 3. Don't do this alone. The gift of ecumenism, it's here to help you collaborate, not to compete. Now, as I said in my introduction, I'm the Principal Officer for Pentecostal, Charismatic and Multicultural Relations at Churches Together in England. Now, Churches Together in England is the ecumenical instrument in England and unites in pilgrim those churches in England which acknowledge God's revelation in Christ, confess the Lord Jesus Christ as God and Saviour according to the scriptures, and in obedience to God's will and in the power of the Holy Spirit, commit themselves to seek to deepen their communion with Christ and with the wider body, and to fulfill their mission to proclaim the gospel by common witness and service in the world, and in particular in England. So Churches Together in England, we have over 50 member churches representing the major denominations across England, from your Methodist to your Baptist, independent churches, Orthodox, Pentecostal, Charismatics, Anglican Communion, and mission is a key priority in our strategy. Stepping into ecumenism and reaching out to other denominations, movements, and traditions across England, and dare I say the world, who are doing similar missional endeavors as you, will enrich your mission and, most importantly, the people that you are called to serve. Now, whilst doing mission with our homeless community, we did this in an ecumenical way, working across different denominations, which compounded our influence, our resources, and ultimately impacted those we were called to serve. Now, when each member stood in the understanding that the mission was God's and that we were solely stewards of this mission for this moment in time, because the church and the mission will continue when we are gone, people were able to then put away tribalism, put away their 7-point strategic plan, and look for points of commonality that they could find to further the mission and impact people's lives. Now, CTE has over 2,000 gatherings across England, and you'll be able to find your local CTE group on the site, which I'll say at the end of my talk. And this will give you the opportunity, if you are doing mission across England, to connect with the broader family of God, to share your missional objectives, share what God is doing in your community, share resources, and combine and come together to impact the people that you are called to serve. And you can find this by going to www.cte.org.uk. We would love to engage with you, to connect with you, to even partner you with some great missional work that's happening across England. Now, finally, and I'm not one of those people that say, finally, I'm going to go on for another 15 minutes. Finally, I just want to remind you that you are God's son and God's daughter before his missionary, minister, or priest. Let rest unlock your relationship with God to see more of who he is, to then reveal more of who you are and who you are being formed to be as you do mission. Cultivating healthy rhythms and sustaining ministry is very important, and you can only do that if you sustain yourself. I dare you to be radically inclusive and develop those in your midst who are usually overlooked, who don't see leadership or being a member of your missional team as something they can do. I dare you as a leader to call that out of them. I dare you to qualify them even when they don't qualify themselves, because they will be a great gift to your mission to transform the church and the world. And finally, never be afraid to do mission alone. The body of Christ is vast, and there is another organization, church, or mission field that is waiting to connect with you. I'm Shermara Fletcher, and it's been an absolute privilege to speak with you about sustaining healthy rhythms to sustain you as you do mission in your urban context. Thank you.